You want to start from the beginning?
Yeah, first decade.
Well, the first thing I remember is being born. We were, Maury wasn't born, of course, he's younger. I just say Aileen and I. Aileen was almost 3 years older than me. We lived on Belt Avenue. That area now is not the nicest area to visit. But we had an apartment, I think it was on the second or third floor, and Aunt B and Uncle Charlie lived across the hallway. Aunt B was Mom's sister, and Mom's the daughter of Grandpa Lewis and Grandma Betsy. If I look the other way, it's because Diane's helping me with some of the names. But I never knew Grandpa Lewis because I'm named after him. And of course, in the Jewish traditions, one of the traditions is to be named after a relative who has passed away, to which you want to honor. So I never knew the guy, but I heard a lot of good words. And I was really young when I was born, so I didn't really have a choice. But I ended up as Lewis. Lived on Belt Avenue. It was a tough neighborhood. I only had one grandma when I was born. My father's mother and father had passed away, and my mother's father had passed away. That's the Lewis. And all that was left was my mother's mother. And she didn't. I think she died when I was about 5. You go to the grave marker in the cemetery in St. Louis and find out exactly when she passed away. She hated to come to the apartment because she had to walk the stairs. There were no elevators then. And when I say no elevators, there were very few that existed. So she would visit, and short visits, hated walking stairs. She passed away before I got to really know her completely. So I really grew up with no grandparents, which wasn't so bad. A lot of kids had grandparents. I did not. So there were sometimes emotional issues about that, but not too often. Growing up on Belt Avenue was tough. We moved then, I must have been about 7, and it was 6300 block in McPherson, east of Skinker. And we moved in there upstairs again. And downstairs now was Uncle Sal and Aunt Sally. So Uncle Sal and Sally had 3 kids. And now, by that time, Maury was born, and Dad had 3 kids. So we used to fight, argue, enjoy each other's company. And the one thing about McPherson is we used to go to the park on Sundays. I can recall the family would get together. Everybody would bring some food. They'd put it in their big purses or baskets or boxes or whatever they had. We would take the streetcar to the park, Heman Park. We'd take the streetcar because we didn't have a car. And all we had was a van that my dad used for his dry cleaning business. He owned a company called A&G Cleaners. An awful lot of people were in the small businesses, like my father. He had one full-time employee and a couple other employees. His employee was named Charlie, and Charlie was the presser. He did all the pressing. I used to go down to the store, to his store in a streetcar, and help with blocking hats. That's where you apply steam to the hat, and it spins around in circles, and you clean it with a brush, and put guards on hangers, clothes guards. But I didn't go down until I think I was 8 years old is when I started going down there. 40s were okay. We lived in a nice neighborhood now. We had friends. It was a nice house, and like I say, Sally lived downstairs. We were upstairs. And Aunt Ann and Uncle Harold, they were down the block. And and Aunt Bee and Uncle Charlie, they moved above their grocery store on Tower Grove. Used to take a streetcar there. Once I took a streetcar there because I took a streetcar there a lot. But one time I went there, I used to collect stamps. I still have the stamp collection. I know where it is. So if the boys want to get a stamp collection, which probably has some expensive stamps, now that 60 years have gone by since I started a collection. So one time I took the bus back to the Lindell bus, and I forgot to ask for a transfer, and I got off the bus, and I didn't have enough money for the new bus. I tried to get on the bus, but he wouldn't let me on because he wanted 7 cents, and all I had was 3 cents. So I hid between 2 signs so the bad guys couldn't get me at a filling station. I wasn't smart enough to ask somebody for 4 pennies, but that was a lot of money in those days. And so I hid between 2 signs, and when I didn't show up at the house, my mother freaked out. My father freaked out. All the aunts and uncles freaked out. So they all went out. She called the police. She called everybody. And they went out searching for me along the bus lines to see if I was around, because kidnappings happen once in a while. And they found me between 2 signs sitting there. My mom saw my shoes were sticking out. And my mom used to have a great expression. I'm going to beat the crap out of you. So when she saw me, she said, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. Then she started crying that she found me. And I said, well, if you're happy that you found me, why are you going to beat the crap out of you? And she said, because you aggravated me. I said, okay. Pop had during World War II, he had a bad back and he was rejected. He tried to go into the military with Uncle Sal. Uncle Sal went in as a Army GI, and thank God he came back. But Pop was rejected because of his back, so he became a civil defense person. So they used to have blackouts during the World War II, and they would practice it with a siren. So you hear a siren, your job was to turn off your lights. If not, you pulled a black screen down, like a shade, to blacken out the outside so you can't see any lights. So when the bombers came to blow up the city, they wouldn't see any lights and maybe they would miss the city. The city of St. Louis was one of the good sites to bomb because we had Curtiss Wright there. And Curtiss Wright was a manufacturer of airplanes. And so my father became a riveter. And when the war was almost over, he lost his job because they didn't need as many planes, and that's when he went into dry cleaning business. Where was I? So he was in Curtiss Wright, and he also civil defense, and when the blackout occurred, Pop would have to put on his armband with a big CD on it and his gas mask strapped to his side, and put on his big steel white helmet that had a big CD on it for the civil defense, or citizens defense person. And he'd walk the streets. So if a bomb was dropped, he had a gas mask to survive, and has a certain part of St. Louis he was responsible for to move the people to safe places. Matter of fact, I still have stored away the helmet and the gas mask. I want to back up for a minute, and I don't know if you know, but there's a picture of all the aunts and uncles on the Radinsky side that has been provided to everybody. So everybody knows there were 9 brothers and sisters on the Radinsky side. On my dad's side, not many people know about it. There was a brother who made it to the States who I never met and passed away before I was born. Then there were 2 sisters, Annie and Eva. Eva was married to Howard. Eva Goldfeder, Annie Goldfeder, and Annie married a fellow up in Rock Island, and Eva married a fellow in St. Louis. Pop had, I think it was 6 brothers and sisters, and when he immigrated to the States at 2 years old, via riding on Eva's shoulders for several hundred miles, one of his brothers was taken into the Russian army, and then the other ones just didn't make it. He didn't see them. He never told me he saw them killed, but a high probability that's what happened to him during World War II, during the Holocaust. It was September, I think, October of 1952. I had difficulty walking and difficulty with certain areas of my body, and they found out I had polio. That ripped up the whole family. I was always an issue, with the family. But had to solve it, and most people with polio, they just let them dwindle onto whatever part of the body was injured and give them support structures, crutches, wheelchairs, whatever it may be. But of course, knowing Hilda, and you guys know Hilda, my mother, she wouldn't accept it, so she tried to get into St. Anthony's Hospital, and they refused to let her in because they had so many kids, and they told her to just take your son Louis, and go to some hospital and do what can be done. And of course, you know how Hilda accepted that one. And she, and there's a lot of documentation on this, but basically, she told them to go screw themselves, and that was cleaned up, that word. And she took me to St. Anthony's Hospital, which was the premier hospital in the greater area, and they wouldn't accept me. So my mom got a bed in the hospital and put me on the bed and said, "You're checked in," and rolled the bed down the hallway, and they said, "Where are you going?" They said, "Well, I can't find his room." I said, "What room's he in?" He says, "I'm not sure." And anyway, through the back door, she got me into the hospital, and I was in a ward where there were 20, 24 people in the ward, something like that. And I knew what was going on. I mean, I was 9 years old. I was not, to the point that I didn't understand the reality of polio. So my face was half paralyzed on the left side, and I couldn't walk. My legs were paralyzed, and the will of a person to get well is a strong indicator. And I went to the ward, and I saw these kids in wheelchairs and braces and all this crap. And I used to have wheelchair races down the hall. I used to get a lot of trouble with wheelchair races, but I formed a group of people in wheelchairs for tournaments, and we used to have eliminations and who's the best in a wheelchair, et cetera, et cetera. We got in trouble for that too, but that's all right. I decided that was bullshit, and I would walk again, and they said no, and I said yes, and I went through therapy visits, and I started walking without crutches. And then my face was paralyzed, so they gave me a electronic shock treatment. They used to put a wool rag on my face to dry it out, and then a heat lamp would be next, and the heat lamp used to, again, not only dry it out, but take the face and make it more available to the nerve endings with the heat lamp. and then they would take a needle and not shove it in my face, but basically use it to increase shock waves, figuring if they could find a live nerve, they can nurture the nerve and bring my face back. But the whole left side of my face was up about an inch or so, and I was pretty ugly in the mirror. So they gave up on me and said there's no way that his face will be improved. And you know, when you say that thing to my mother, that's just like an incentive bonus for her to say, you know, screw you, which she said. And they gave up on me because I was so mean, and I used to smack the crap out of the attendants. And so my mother was taught how to use the equipment. We used to go down to the hospital from our house because we were now discharged. I could walk. And we take the bus every week, several times a week, and give me shock treatments. And like I say, they gave up on me, so they taught my mother how to do it. So she sat on top of me and did it, and I would cuss at her, and she'd cuss right back, and I'd slap her, and she'd slap me back harder. So I figured no gain there, and went through the treatments, and she found a live nerve and brought my face back. So that's not just part of me, but part of Hilda, and which is called Nanny, and the way Nanny operated. You know, just don't tell Nanny no, and you'll be better off, because you'll be saying yes sometimes down the road eventually, and that'll be the story. We lived above and below each other, and my mother used to yell down the back stairs to Aunt Sally, Sally, come on up, I need to talk to you. Sally would yell back, if you need to talk to me, you come down the stairs. And they would argue at the top of the stairs, about the stairs, who should go up or who should go down. So Pop and Uncle Saw got fed up with that crap. So what they did is they put a buzzer system in the clothes chutes, because in those days, you had a clothes chute, you threw your clothes in, and it went down through an alleyway, a tin chute, and ended up on the floor in the laundry room. If Sally wanted to talk to Hilda, she'd press a buzzer, and a bell would go off in our house, and Mom had to go to the clothes chute and talk to Sally. Well, if you could imagine yelling from the second floor down a clothes chute, down to the basement, the sound, back up her clothes chute, and then going back and forth, it just drove us nuts. The basement was half concrete and half dirt, and we had a chute for coal. Our furnace was a coal-fired furnace, so my cousin Ronnie and I would have to take turns starting the furnace fire and starting up the coal as a fuel for the furnace. And my pop insisted on hot water at 6 o'clock in the morning, so one of us took turns, had to get up at about 5 in the morning to start the fire in the boiler to give him hot water. It was also for heat, but yeah, so we used to get in coal fights, and then we'd come upstairs filled with coal dust and get the shit beat out of me again. But I was getting used to it by then, and that was good old Hilda, baby, Nanny. So we would start a fire with wood. We put coal on top of it and get the boiler going and give my dad his hot water so he could shave. Pretty simple. But that's what it was like living in that era. And then back to McPherson in the 50s, our biggest thing we did was burying my brother Maury up to his neck, and we wanted to put molasses on him and see if the ants would eat him, but we were getting too much trouble, so we just buried him up to his neck, until a neighbor would come by and go to my mom and say, your son buried your other son again. And she'd come down and beat the crap out of me. But there was a peach tree, and so we'd get in peach tree fights. We had 2 tables we used to turn on the side, and Ronnie and I used to throw peaches at each other. Even Cousin Alvin got involved in the peach fights. They were really cool, but they were really sticky. So when a peach would hit you, it would hurt for the hit, but if it opened up, you were filled with the peach juice, and man, the ants and the bugs loved you and would bite you all the time. And then my mom would come out and see me, and she'd beat the hell out of me and send me in the house. 50s were great years, just super years. It had a lot of good friends, played a lot, played in the alley a lot, rode our bikes. We had a game with Maury, my younger brother. We made him lay down on the sidewalk, and cousin Ronnie and I would see how close we'd come to him, riding at high speeds without hitting him. But Ronnie and I knew ahead of time we were going to hit him. So we would just get the bikes going, and he would lay there waiting for us because he wanted to be our friend to play with us. So he would lay there like a nut, and we would ride the bikes right over him, and he would scream, and then Nanny would come outside and beat the shit out of me, and send Ronnie home. But when you say beat the shit out of me, she didn't hit me that hard. As I got older, it was softer, I think. But it meant slapped me around a few times and sent me to my room. Pop, on the other hand, had a strap, and he split the end of the strap. It separated in half, and then he cut it down the middle so it had like 4 straps. I think he probably saw some sort of TV show of Vikings or something like that. I don't know. But he thought that was pretty cool. And so he decided that if I got out of hand, the strap was to come out. And it was hung on a closet door inside. I could see the closet door. And if we were really bad, out came the strap. One time he hit me with it. After that, I would do anything he wanted. So, and the other thing we got in trouble with, that we had a great time, was shooting pigeons. When you're little, you get these bow and arrows. There was 10 cents at the store, and with 10 cents you got a bow and a string, and like 3 or 4 arrows with suction cups on it. So we used to take the suction cups off and sharpen the end in a pencil sharpener. And of course it wasn't electric, it was a cranker. And we used to sharpen up the arrows, and then our backyard used to always get pigeons. So we used to shoot the pigeons. We got in trouble with that too, and you know what happens. Same thing, beat the shit out of me. No computers, no early telephone system. I don't know what the hell so we played outside. Played kick the can, hide and seek, played games till my mother used to yell, to come inside. We would not come in until we were yelled at. We did not want to come in the house because we had so much fun outside. We'd do our homework, and we'd go outside and play. And it was great. The 60s came, and with the 60s I was 16 already, and driving. We had ducks' tails and ducks' asses. My hair was too curly, but you comb it back here and comb it back here and slide your fingers down the middle. It looked like an ass behind your head. That was cool. And we wore jeans on our hips, not on our waists. It was cool. And then you put your belt buckle to the side because that was cool. Never in the front. You need a big belt buckle too. It was just cool. We went to Hamburger Heaven. And I was driving, didn't have our own car, but I was driving when my mom could use her car. And I worked at Hamburger Heaven that year, which was a hamburger slop joint. And you go out as a hot car hop, and you clamp a tray onto the window, and that's how you serve the food. And the Hamburger Heaven was the hangout spot of all hangout spots. And I worked there, so I was very cool because of that. And cool was the big word. You were cool, he was cool, that's cool. Our gang, the Los Hombres, we used to play pool down at Ed's Pool Hall in the Loop. by the way, when I was 9, I sold papers, Saturday night papers in a loop at Westgate on 2 corners. I used to run back and forth across the traffic, drove my mother crazy, seeing me running around with delivering newspapers in front of cars. But I broke the records and made a lot of money. I used to make up to $3 or $4 a night. And there was an English teacher. She was a bitch, and she used to get really pissed at me. And so I didn't like her, she didn't like me. So she flunked me. And when we got to the graduation, I couldn't graduate. I got an F in English. So the school called my mother and said, Hilda, we can graduate your son or not. You know, either way, it's your choice. And my mother said, flunk him. And so they flunked me. So here I was, all my friends at U City going down the aisle, and some friends I established to do going down the aisle, and here I am with a thumb up my ass, not going down any aisle, so I was crushed. I didn't know my mom told him to flunk me until way after high school and college. So 6 of us decided to join the army of the Los Hombres and some other guys because there was no draft, but we said that'd be cool to maybe go to Berlin, which was going on, and building the wall. Maybe we'll go to Berlin and shoot some Germans. But so anyway, they all joined, and I joined too. And the way I joined was I stopped in the spring of '61. My mom was really busy doing the taxes and doing the files and everything. And I remember it was April, taxes due middle of April. And I said, Mom signed it. She says, what is it? And I said, it's a trip approval to go with the school on an outing. She says, okay. She just signed it. I covered up the part about the Army. So about a month later, I came home one Tuesday night with a duffel bag. She said, what the hell is that? And I said, it's an Army duffel bag. She says, where'd you get that? I said, it's from the Army. She says, what Army? I said, our Army. She says, where the hell do you think you're going? I said, I joined the Army. She says, you can't join it with my approval. I said, you signed a piece of paper. So she got mad at me. Can't remember if she beat the hell out of me or not, I'm not sure. But I joined the Army, and a week after I got out of high school, which I didn't get out because I flunked, I left for the Army with my buddies. So I was a non-graduate in the Army, flunky, and of course I couldn't go to OCS school because you can't go to school without, office candidate school without at least a high school degree, which I didn't have. Anyway, I signed up there for one course in English, which would be acceptable by Ladue to give me my high school degree. And then I wanted to be an engineer, and I've always wanted to be an engineer, and I always did great in math, and I always did great in technical courses in science. So I went, when I got out of the Army in December of that year, as a 6-month program, I talked to Rolla about going to school there, and they said, well, there's no reason to talk to us, you're not even a high school graduate. And I said, I will be. I said, so don't worry about that. I said, can I enroll in the fall of '62? So they said, if you want to come to the school, we need to see you take a college course that's accredited and means something. And I said, well, what if I took college algebra at Washington University? I said, great, that'll be approved. So I got a B in the English course, so now I had my high school degree, and I aced out the college algebra. In fact, I was number 1 in college algebra, the course, and everybody in there was, high school graduates, basically. It's the first year of college algebra. So I aced that course. It was a piece of cake, and Rolla said, we'll accept you. So in the fall of '62, I headed off to Rolla, Missouri, to the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy. None of my friends went there, and none of my friends were that good at math and sciences. but I excelled in them all the time. And they thought I was crazy. I would never make it. In my life, I would not make it. And I worked at a nightclub then during summer. During the summer when I took the course at Washington U and the course at this other, for the high school, I worked as a bouncer at a nightclub. I was only 18, I think. Yeah, you had to be 21 to drink. I worked as a bouncer for a nightclub called Peppermint Lounge. That was the coolest place in town. You remember Peppermint Lounge, Diane? It was awesome. And I worked as a bouncer. And I also had a job as a swimming pool as a lifeguard. So I had those two jobs while I was going to two different schools. And I made enough money to save for Rolla. Not enough to pay for the whole year, but it saved a bunch of money. And to pay for the courses because my mother and father could never afford the full course. And got a job at Your Father's Mustache working for a guy named Joe Schiavone out of Connecticut. And they had a bunch of Your Father's Mustaches, so for all the school breaks, I could pick any place I wanted to work. And then when Mardi Gras came around in New Orleans, I went to my professors and asked for a break, if they would give me a break while I went down for Mardi Gras. Well, they thought, Lou, what are you talking about? I said, well, I got a job there and I could make some money, really good money, and pay for school next fall, and it would really help out my parents, and yada yada, sob story. And then a Mardi Gras hit, and I got to go into the Rex Parade playing the washboard on the Father's Mustache float. So I played the washboard, and if you ever seen his thimbles on it, and I had my hat, and I had my little string tie, and my garter on here, and white shirt, and black pants, and played the washboard, and then I worked as a bouncer during Mardi Gras. It was great, loved it. And went back to school, did pretty well, had jobs, different places, summer camp for the Army. Summer camp for the Army, because I was in a reserve, was in Washington, D.C. at Army Map Service. At that time was the Cuban crisis went on, and we worked with the actual photographs of the Cuban missile installations with the Russians that sent over. Really at Rolla, I did pretty well in my first year, and second year, you got to do well to get accepted into a fraternity. I did well enough to be accepted into the Sigma Nu house, which had, I think it was 4 Jewish guys, 4 Catholic guys, a stack of atheists, a few Baptists. It was a great fraternity. And I met a guy named Bud Verdi in the fall of '63. Anyway, a lot of stories in college, but I don't want to repeat too many of them. We got our share of issues, from jumping in trains on weekends that stopped in the middle of a cornfield. I can't tell you the rest of the stories. But they were interesting, like getting thrown into jail in the middle of a small town, and one of our guys hid in the closet when the sheriff went home. After he locked us up, he came out of the closet, unlocked us, and we all left and went back to Rolla. A lot of stories like that on a continual basis. And one time, I remember 2 girls at Lindenwood College. I was lavalier to both of them, and that was a big mistake, because one saw the lavalier and the girl was wearing and said, "Oh wow, you're married to your lavalier to a Sigma Nu." She says, "Which one?" Sigma Nu house. She says, "Washington U." She says, "No, Rolla." He says, "Rolla? Oh, that's where I'm lavalier to." "Well, who's your lavalier mate?" She said, "Lou Goldfeder." She says, "Me too." So I got in trouble. They threw them both in my face next time I saw them and told me to get lost. Anyway, going back, I worked at your father's mustache, and I worked for him every Christmas break, every spring break, in the summers, all over the country. I talked about that earlier a little bit. And I guess it was my end of my junior year. I called my mother and said, I'm leaving Rolla. She says, what are you talking about? Your grades are good. I said, that's not the issue. I'm offered a job as manager, full-time manager of a nightclub chain, Your Father's Mustache, in New York. And it's a great opportunity to grow with the company, yada, yada, boom. And she said, a lot of words, but essentially, if you goddamn think that I got you through school at Rolla for 3 years and you're going to walk into another job without your degree, because I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to kill you. I'm coming down to Rolla. First, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. Then I'm going to kill you. Then I'll kill myself. So if you don't want me to die, you better not take that job. So I said, I guess I shouldn't take the job. She says, now you're starting to think right. Now, Bud and I just seemed to hit it off instantly. We just taught the same language, laughed at the same jokes, ate the same foods, did everything together, and really became extremely close. His girlfriend, Mary Dornan, was working in, had left Morningside College, was finishing her degree in Des Moines, Iowa. So Bud would always want to see her, so Bud and I used to hitchhike up to Des Moines. We became very close friends during those years. We did everything together. We went together, we hitchhiked together, we cried together, we applauded each other, and just became extremely close. Remember one time we hitchhiked, it was cold. I mean, it was bitter, bitter cold. And we're hitchhiking to Des Moines, and we just couldn't get a ride. And finally, we got a ride that took us up to northern Missouri. We were freezing. And I said, Bud, I said, there's a bowling alley across from us. And I said, if we go in a bowling alley, we get warm, we could pee in a bowling alley and everything else. But most of all, we could look at the cars and we could steal a car, drive it to Des Moines and leave it. I said, we got gloves, we're not going to leave fingerprints, and it's cold, and we could get across Missouri border into Iowa quickly. And he said, that's a good idea. Let's steal a car. So I walked around the parking lot and I found a car with keys in it. They're on the floor type of thing. And I said, okay, I found a car. And so Bud says, one more car goes by. If they don't pick us up, we'll steal the car. I said, okay. So a truck pulls up and stops. And the truck is hauling freezers. And they put Bud and I in the back of the trailer, sitting on freezers. Now, obviously, it wasn't turned on. It was just hauling them as appliances, but of all types. In the freezing outside weather, we get a truck with freezers. So we sat in the back, and we were bounced everywhere in the truck. Every bump, we flew up in the air and down. And finally, the driver felt sorry for us, and he came around, stopped the truck. He says, you guys, feel sorry for you back here freezing your ass off. He says, you can ride in the cab at one, you have to sit in the other guy's lap. So Bud sat on my lap. Now, if you can imagine Bud sitting on my lap for 150 miles, going down the interstate, or down a back highway. When we got off, I couldn't stand up straight. My legs were frozen solid with Bud on it, his imprint on it, his ass on it. And but we finally got there. We hitchhiked many times to Des Moines. We had a great time. We just had great times together. Anyway, I took a job, took 2 interview trips, took a job for Fisher Controls. It was called Fisher Governor then. I took a job with them as a sales engineer and settled in and had a good time. But I was the first Jewish sales engineer at Fisher. In fact, Bill Fisher called me before I took the job and asked me to come back for an interview. And I went back for an interview, and he said, Lou, he said, if you get hired as a sales engineer, you're going to run across a bunch of idiots and jerks and in parts of the country, and they'll never met a Jew before, and they'll have trouble with it. And I said, he says, how are you going to be able to handle that? And I said, well, we could handle it, or I'll just call my uncle and we'll just buy him. I would say that just for kicks, we'd buy him and to support this Jewish attitude. And Bill Fisher says, I like how you think. So he says, you're hired. And I was hired as the highest salary for a sales engineer that year. I was hired at $6,800 a year, which was like unbelievable salary.
How is it that there's thousands of people there, $50 million company, and the CEO took the time to interview you?
Yeah.
Did you do that with everyone?
No. But he loved Jewish people. He was an opera man. He wrote opera. He spent an awful lot of time in New York. Well, Bill Fisher didn't even know that he had to do this job until his brother was killed and his father died. His mother found Bill in a theater district in New York, supposedly granted him by the year and made him come back to Marshalltown to run the business. And Bill Fisher was a brilliant person. He finally told me one day, he says, what you got to do is surround yourself by brilliant people, and then you can make a lot of money. He says, that's critical. He says, you must surround yourself with brilliant people. He says, you don't have to know the business, you have to know how to handle people. So that was his philosophy that worked. I used to go down to St. Louis and visit the family a lot, and my mother used to always try to fix me up with Jewish girls. Obviously, there weren't many in Marshalltown. There were 0 in Marshalltown, in fact. And I bought a car. Never had a car until I graduated college. And I had to pay for it myself. My parents gave me food for my graduation gift. They couldn't afford much, so for graduation, I said, why don't you give me the staples? And we went to the grocery store and picked out all the canned stuff that wouldn't spoil and shipped it to me. And so that was my graduation gift, which was very kind of them, knowing how they, didn't beg for dollars, but had challenges. So there I was in Marshalltown. I had no suits, because I had borrowed a suit for the interview, so I didn't have a suit to wear to work. So I went down to a place called Gildner's downtown, told him I was a new sales engineer, and Ben Rector sent me there. And I said, Ben Rector sent me here. He says, you help me with credit on buying some suits. And they said, absolutely, and they gave me 3 suits on credit. So I bought a car, and it was $4,600, the car. It was the hottest Cougar, Mercury Cougar, on the road. It had a 410 engine in it. It was fast and loud and wonderful. And I had an 8-track deck in it, tape deck, and wide oval fiberglass tires in it, and air conditioning in it, which was totally unusual in cars in the 60s, have air conditioning. Hell, most people didn't have it in the house, let alone a car. And it was a hot car. I met Diane, my wife, in the June of '69 at my brother's wedding. She was best friends with my sister-in-law, Roberta. They grew up together for many years, and Maury married her. And this is one of the gals that my mother tried to set me up with. And Diane's response was, "This guy must be a real jerk if his mother's running around the country trying to set up dates for him. I mean, he's 27 years old. I mean, he's got to be a real loser." So that's how she started off with me. And my brother got married to Roberta, Roberta being Diane's dear friend. Diane went to the wedding without a date. She was dating a guy that had a Chevrolet dealership. Anyway, Diane went to the wedding stag, and I was dating a gal in St. Louis, and she decided that I was not serious about her, and I went stag. So I met Diane in the receiving line, and I looked at her and I said something like, "Put me down on your dance ticket," and which is an old expression. I took her out that night because we were both stag, and there was a tornado in St. Louis. We lost power, so I went to the liquor store and bought a bottle of scotch. So I took her out after the wedding was over, and I took her to a Lake Lewis pond, and I proposed that night, and she turned me down, and I didn't get laid. We went off on our separate ways. We dated on and off. This was the June of 69. So I was in Marshalltown, she was in St. Louis. Difficulty in air travel and stuff. So I basically dated her as much as I could long distance, and I would go to St. Louis, we'd go out, and she would come to Marshalltown, we'd go out. That was 69. We went on about 10 times, and then I decided, Fisher asked me if I would go to Seattle to start up a new company, a new representative in Seattle, and I said yes, and went out with Diane, and I said, "How would you like being married to a sales engineer?" She says, "Oh, I would love it." And I said, "Even one that travels all the time?" She says, "Oh yeah, I'd love it." I said, "Great." I said, "I'm leaving." She says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Seattle." She said, "Seattle, what are you going to do there? I'm a new office starting up. How long will you be there?" "I don't know. At least 6 months." And I left. Didn't say a word. Got to Seattle. I called a wedding planning company. And I said, "How much time do you need for planning a wedding?" They said, 9 weeks. I said, what do you mean 9 weeks? They said, "Well, in those days, you had to order invitations. It'd take a month to print them. And you got to send them out a month ahead of time." So I called Diane, and I said, "What are you doing 9 weeks from today?" She said, "Why?" I said, "You want to go to a wedding?" And your mom said, "Well, whose wedding?" I said, "Ours. Will you marry me?" She said, "Sure." So I proposed on the telephone, second proposal, and she accepted. So I was broke, and I said, "Listen, I'm broke. Would you mind letting my mom know to put on the calendar or whatever?" Or something like that. And Diane called Nanny and said, "What are you doing December 20th? He says, "I don't know why." He says, "You want to go to a wedding, to my wedding?" She said, "Oh, well, who are you marrying?" She says, "I'm marrying your son." And that was how Nanny found out about me getting married. So Thanksgiving, I flew into St. Louis, the engagement party. I gave her a ring. And then in December, I flew back in on arrived, took a midnight flight, came in schnockered, and on a Saturday morning, and we got married on Sunday. And we left Monday for Seattle. And it was our honeymoon, because I didn't have the time. So we drove for First night was in western Kansas. Next night was in Casper, Wyoming. And then Laramie, and then next night was in Park City, Utah. Stayed there for 2 nights, I think. And Park City, we drove to Seattle. We drove Diane's car from St. Louis to Seattle, sold it there, and she got a job working for a law firm, and I was working for Fisher at a new office, and she would take the bus to work, and we had nothing. We didn't own anything because the apartment they gave me for business was furnished. So we had a TV and a stereo system. And we lived there and had a great time, met a lot of nice people. And now we're finished in early April of '71. The office is working great, everything's working fine. And we moved back to Marshalltown, Iowa. Got to Marshalltown, and Diane started crying. Quite a change from Marshalltown, from Seattle, let alone growing up in St. Louis. And there we were. We got an apartment on South 6th Street. I want to say it's 511 South 6th Street, something like that. And a garden apartment, which meant you're below the ground level.
You're in the basement.
You're in the basement. And the window outside is at foot level. So if a person walks by, you see their feet. That was the garden apartment. We didn't realize that. We had no furniture, no nothing, but we had gotten a bridge table and chairs for our wedding, so we used that for a dining room table. By the way, we still have the same bridge table and chairs. And we borrowed 2 gym mattresses from Keith Wilhelm, and they became our bed. Then we bought 2 flower boxes from somewhere,
Drugstore.
and that was our dresser. And we had nothing on the walls, nothing in the kitchen. Keith gave us a barrel, a nail barrel, for an end table, and I had a squeeze lamp for a lamp that I squeezed onto it, and that was our living room table. So then I built a bookcase. No, I didn't build a bookcase yet. So that's how we lived, and then Jason was born, and no kids were allowed, so we had to move, and we rented a house from a guy named Bill.
Hobson.
Huh?
Hobson.
Bill Hobson. It was on North
6th Street.
6th Street again. And I think it was 203 North 6th Street. We rented that house, and we had some furniture and lived on there until we moved till Diane was pregnant with Aaron.
No, we didn't know I was pregnant with him.
We didn't know you were pregnant with Aaron. But then we moved from there to,
Arlington Drive.
we bought a house on Arlington Drive. We paid $34.9, I think, or something like that for it. We thought that was the end of the world. I bought a swing set that we put up, one of those 5-minute swing sets, and I found out it's 5 minutes to open the box. It was like 5 hours to put the sumbitch together. But we had a 5-minute swing set, and the boys couldn't wait, and then finished it, and they played on that. Then they got their big wheels, and they learned to ride down the path from the metal workshop house, through the door from the garage, jump the garage door ledge, and go through the garage and come out and spin around in front of the house. I guess we just progressed to Freiburg Court. 78, we went to Freiburg Court, and the guys loved it. Had this long hill in the front where Jason used to push Aaron down the hill, and he couldn't climb up the hill, and he used to cry because he couldn't climb up the hill. And as soon as he got to the top, Jason pushed him down again, and he'd cry some more.
On garbage can lids.
And then they used garbage can lids for sleds, and had a blast at the house. Loved the house. I shared a garden with a neighbor.
And do you remember your memories from the Vietnam War?
Vietnam. I had fraternity brothers, lost some fraternity brothers. I was pissed about Vietnam. I didn't think we should be there. I was in college when we started Vietnam. I didn't think we should be there because of the French were there for 10 years and lost. And what make us think that we could go there and win? But our John Kennedy was a president, and he felt that we could do anything. He was a Democrat, of course, and he sent us to Vietnam, and I signed up in my junior year to be a fighter pilot because of him. And 4 of us signed up, and I flunked it. Passed everything, but I flunked the eye test. So I was turned down by the Marines as a fighter pilot. The other 3 guys went. 1 was killed in Vietnam. 1 was killed in San Diego area, where a trainer plane, a new recruit, took a fraternity brother into the side of a mountain that happened to be Bud Verde's brother. It was a very difficult time at the fraternity house. And then 1 retired as a general in the Marine Armed Forces. But it was a difficult time when Art lost his brother, Jim. I was already deferred. I went in the Army in '61 and needed 5.5 years of meetings, so I had completed my meetings and didn't need to go. Although I tried to go, but I wanted to go. I wanted to kill the sons of bitches, but I didn't get a chance to go. Probably the best thing that happened to me. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have met your mother, and you wouldn't have been my son. But in any case, that was Vietnam. It was a tough time. What other questions
All right.
do you have?
Well, why don't we pause there? And
All right.
we left off on going to Europe, and we'll pick that up next time.
All right.